everybody, Jess from Fourth and Birch here. Today we are going to make a shaker mold with a heart. The previous shaker mold that I have done is a little syringe here. I have not yet, but you can put a little black vinyl on here to kind of just outline it a little bit and accentuate the little measuring lines. This one I used, it was kind of an experiment. Some people say use water, glycerin, mineral oil, a lot of different things that you can use in a shaker. So I bought something, it was actually a little expensive for what it was, but actually some personal lubrication liquid from Walmart. But if you actually look at it, it's somewhere in here. So it has purified water and glycerin and a few other things in it, but it's body safe. So I don't think it will eat away at any of the polymer clay inclusions that you have in here or any of the glitter, as long as it's the safe glitter, you know, not the like dissolving or whatnot. But this is actually, it looks fairly liquidy in the bottle, but my stuff doesn't actually move around that well in here. So either I should have put either a bigger air bubble, which most people don't want any, but I think a bigger air bubble would have helped everything move around a little more. They're just all kind of sitting at the bottom. They do move, but they're slow. So I'm actually going to take this and add a little more water to it, and we're going to see how it goes. But we're going to use a heart today for my resin that I'm using. I'm using KS resin, liquidy split. If you haven't bought any recently, the UV epoxy is the one that you want. It's a 1-to-1 ratio with, this is the hardener, and then the other one is the actual resin itself. But the UV one is the best one to get if you can. If you have some older stuff, it's liquidy split. It's not the ultra UV, but if you can, get this one, because this one has UV protection in it, which means that it is not going to yellow as fast as epoxies that do not have UV protection in them. I am using shimmer ink from, I think you pronounce this Brea Reese, maybe Brea Reese, but nonetheless, this is shimmer alcohol, and it's hard to see here because it's all sparkly on the label, but the color is rose. So I'm going to shake this up really well. I can still see at the bottom I still have some pigment to mix in. Alright, let's see what that looks like. A little more came out than I planned, however, it's actually might not be bad. The more additives you put into your resin, it oftentimes accelerates the hardening process, which sounds like a good thing, but what that also does is it increases the heat. And it's the liquidy split, which means it's a fast curing resin. So it already has a fast cure time, which means it already has a kind of a high temperature that it gets to. I just put a ton of bubbles in here with stirring that, so I'm going to give it a second. I'm going to put it up by my heat lamp here a little bit. Gotta be careful with heat because, again, this already has a decent amount of heat that it creates on its own. when alcohol inks, and it's hard to see here, but how it kind of keeps that swirl to it. That's kind of the mica that they use to put in. So anyway, we are going to fill this. I'm going to try to be very careful and get all the way around the edges first to try to avoid any air bubbles way down at the bottom that I wouldn't be able to see. And this is going to cure with this kind of marbly look to it. That's what it does when you have mica powder or certain things like that in your resin. So there we go. I'm going to give that a little bit of time for a lot of the bubbles to come to the surface. I could either spray alcohol on it, although I don't have my little spritzer, or I'm going to use just a tiny bit of heat. You have to be very careful with adding heat because you can very easily ruin your silicone molds. So give this a little time to degas a little bit of the bubbles. I'm going to do just a quick hit with this. It's probably good. All right. With that, and then we're going to let this sit for a few hours. Again, this is a quick curing resin. Let's see what it says on the bottle here. If you were doing a tumbler, you could recoat in 2 hours. It's dry to the touch in 3 to 4, full cure in 24. So for these, I don't need to wait for a full cure for me to take it out of the mold, as long as it's not bendy. If it seems like it's soft enough to bend, which sometimes these are because they're actually not a very thick mold, something like this that is thick all the way through is not going to be quite as bendy when you take it out of the mold. But things that are potentially like this are much thinner, and it sometimes, you know, this one's been cured for weeks, but let's just say it was bendable. That one I actually might need to keep in there for the full 24 hours. So we'll see about this. It's easy enough to tell when you try to take it out of the mold. This was the mold, you know, you kind of bend it a little bit, and if the resin bends with it, then you'll leave it in there longer. And or if you do take it out of the mold and it's a little bendy, you just have to make sure you put it on a very flat surface and that it doesn't kind of curl up, or you're going to have a final product that is not flat. So all right, we're going to let this be. As you can see, let's see if I can zoom in on it a little bit here. Get some of my shadow out of the way. Oh, that's not helpful. I have my heat lamp up here, so that's where this, there we go, where the reflection's coming from. But all of this mica powder is kind of coming into the surface. I'm actually not going to touch this or stir this because I actually like that. I like that it gets a little somewhat symmetrical, and then it has a little bit of this into it. If I were to stir this right now and kind of mix it up, that's probably the way it's going to stay, and it's not going to be, you know, it's going to look a little more kind of like this, just kind of all over the place. So we're going to let that be and see what it looks like in a few hours. All right, everybody, this is ready to go. I actually did let it sit overnight. Even though this was a fast curing epoxy, I could still bend this a little bit. I could tell it was pretty flimsy, so I let it sit overnight. So we're going to carefully kind of break the seal all the way around it, and then slowly take it out. And if you can see here, there is a little divot right here, and it's, you can see it even better there. It's in the mold. It's a little bump there, so it leaves a little divot here. And what that is supposed to be is when we're making a shaker and you put your flat piece of plastic over it, that leaves a bit of a hole so you can inject your liquid and whatever you're putting on the inside for liquid. And I was never successful with shakers whatsoever. They leaked. It was frustrating. I liked them a lot. I couldn't bring myself to use them myself, or let alone sell them for the leaking and the short lifespan that they had. So I actually learned from a YouTuber. Her name is Amy Made, AMYMADE, and she has a whole series called Watch Me Resin, and she has changed the game for me. So basically, she fills this in with UV resin to make it whole, to make it complete, and then drills her own hole, and that has worked phenomenally for me. So we are going to do that. So I'm going to get a few supplies and we'll get that done. All right, so I just took some tape and I taped, well, first what I did, actually, back that up, I took just a little sandpaper and sanded in here a little bit just to rough it up so the resin sticks a little better. I have just a piece of tape on the outside and a piece of tape on the inside, and all that is doing, get some of my shavings out of there from sanding, all that is doing is creating a bit of a barrier. When I put my UV resin on the inside there, this will be the little walls, I guess. I use my Counterculture DIY UV resin. And we don't need much. But we're going to put it in slowly, making sure it gets to all the corners so there's not a big air bubble in there. I think that is good. Stay there, buddy. All right. I'm going to do my UV. All right. I put this on for about 60 seconds. I'm going to set that back. And I think I still have a little bit of a divot where it comes in and it goes down just a tiny bit. So I'm going to add a little bit more. The one thing I didn't want was too much, so it was leaking out everywhere. But I think I need a tiny bit more. It's too much. All right, that's probably more than I need to, but I can sand off the dome. All right, there we go. All right, so let's see if that was enough. Now we're gonna try this, and much better. That feels nice and smooth. So take off our tape. after my tape. I personally like to do just another 30 seconds with this, just in case anything was hiding and didn't fully cure. All right, so set that aside. Take a look at this. There is just, I'm trying to find something that has some color to it so you can see. I did add a little too much, but better than not enough. And I'm going to sand that. This whole top, this ridge here, gets sanded anyway. And it's very important that it is flat, or when we try to lay our plastic piece down, where this, see, this is still a little domed. I can still catch my toothpick on it a little bit. Right here you'll have problems with leaking of the fluid, so you definitely want that flat. So I'm going to continue with that. All right, so this part is sanded. I'm going to go around and just sand the rest of this ridge. All right, I'm going to wipe this down with alcohol just to get all the little shavings and pieces out of there. The little dust. There we go, dust. And I will be back. All right, so I have alcoholed that. Next, what I'm going to do, got this from Resin Shaker film for epoxy. And basically, can't even see it. Looks like this. And I cut this for something else. There's no great way to see that unless I get there we go. Oh, wait, there. Okay, anyway. So this is a clear, there we go, flimsy shield. This just helps us seal across the top of this. This does not give us strength. We end up cutting this out almost like a cookie cutter around here. We resin it to the top of this, but then we put more resin all across the top. So this is not what gives us our strength, because this is not strong. This just gives us a bit of structure, and then the resin takes over from there. So let me get this set up and I'll show you how I trace it. All right, let's see if I can zoom in a little bit here. So what I do with this, first make sure that it fits. There we go. What we want to do is we don't want to go on the very outside of our shaker resin. We want to go about in the center of it. Oops. And if it moves, obviously move it back. This is kind of like an inky pen. It's the best I could find. Little pinpoint Sharpies work well. I also find personally that when I kind of make little dots, little quick swipes like this, it helps me mostly stay on the inside. Alright, so there's that, and we are going to cut this out. So I can back it up a little bit now. I have a scissors that curves just a little bit. You can see it's not totally straight, it curves, which helps me with a lot of these things, especially if you flip it over. Alright, I'm probably going to show my age here, but this kind of reminds me of Shrinky Dinks. Anybody? Bueller? Anybody? Okay. Alright. So, we're going to take that, and I'm going to take just a little bit of paper towel and put some alcohol on it, and then I'm just going to clean my lines off of there. Helps if I wipe the right side off. And my mat's not the cleanest here either. It's mostly is old stuff that is dried, but there is a little bit of like shimmer powder and stuff like that, so. Okay. Here's the heart. There's the cover on it. So, the reason that we did not cut it to the very edge of this is that I'm first going to put this on and anchor it with some UV resin, but then I'm going to put regular resin and dome over it. So before we actually tack this down though, I'm going to do a couple extra things. I'm going to set this guy aside. It's all ready to go on there when we're ready. Alright, so this seems maybe counterintuitive, but we covered up this hole. I didn't like that this was just a small groove that was going to be right next to my thin transparent sheet. But we do need a hole in here somewhere to fill. You will see some people fill this up with fluid and their inclusions and then super glue on the top and then put this on and hope for the best. That is a way you can do it. However, I also have not had any luck with that. That has been pretty awful. The problem is whatever adhesive you're using here, when you already have liquid in here, inevitably liquid gets a little bit onto here, and it is impossible to make this adhere and harden and be waterproof, basically, not leak. So we covered up this hole, but we're going to make our own hole. It's actually going to be our own circular hole down a bit from this one. So I'm going to use my little drill. These can get a little out of hand when you're going through resin. It goes well, and then boom, when you pop through, and you don't want to get your finger or anything, because these can be pretty uncomfortable. Could even be a trip to the ER. So what you always want to do is just make sure that your fingers are nowhere on the receiving end of this, because you think you will be able to stop in time and you will not. So anyway, so what I like to do instead of like doing this, this is not going to necessarily be very straight on because this is spinning, right? So this is difficult to get in exactly where you want it. So what I personally like to do is I like to find something. This is another shaker that I have, a cute little uterus. But it's the perfect height for if I come in and do this. So I'm going to have my hands above this. So if this happens to go through, I'm only going to hit the other side of my... I actually won't even go through that far. It's not even that deep, but nonetheless. So once I turn this on, I'm going to stabilize this, and I'm just going to come through like that. So. That is it. It was nice and controlled. It's a nice hole in there. Hold on, there we go. And I'm gonna take a minute to vacuum this up and alcohol my workspace off again, and I will be back. All right, so I've cleaned everything up. We still have, sorry, I get too close there. Our hole in here. And I'm going to show you some of the inclusions that I'm going to put in. You can make these so they have a clear back. This one is going to be a badge, you know, that people put on their chest and then have their little hospital, or this is for a vet tech, the badge hanging from it. So I don't like the clear back for that, just because this ends up getting glued or adhered to one of those, either an alligator clip or a the retractable badge thing. So anyway, so this one I put the colorful epoxy around the edges, but then instead of waiting for it to cure and covering it with clear, I just did the whole thing red. So because of that, none of my inclusions are pink or red, or I wouldn't be able to see them very well. So this is a mixture of Bones and Pet Paws polymer clay pieces from Resin Rockers. Also my hearts here, I picked out the white ones and the pink ones. The white ones because I already have the bones here, and the pink ones because they weren't going to show up very well anyway. That is also from Resin Rockers. Those are heart polymer clay pieces. They have so many types of polymer clay pieces. They're pretty cool. You just need to make sure that they are safe for it. It'll say on there too to make sure that they won't disintegrate. All right, so I'm going to put those in. That's what's going to float around in there. And then I usually throw some sort of glitter in. And in this case, come on, let me focus my camera. There we go. This is called Glow Bugs. It has some glow cane in it from Mr. Fancy Pants. And I love putting this stuff on tumblers. I actually have not used it in a shaker yet. It has a little bit of a yellowish green hue. It's kind of hard to see under my yellow lamp above us, but it's pretty awesome, and it glows in the dark. So we're going to put that in there. good. Okay, one more. All right. I don't put super fine glitter in like something like this because it's super fine. It tends to clump a little bit and you don't see it floating around very nicely. And it kind of, if anything, it almost clouds up the fluid, the water a little bit. So I tend not to use super fine stuff. This is about the smallest I use. You could also use like super chunky stuff. This is just something cheap from Walmart. Like $1 for red chunky glitter. That's pretty chunky. Or something like this is kind of in between. This is called a chunky mix. This is from the Glitter Guy. That would be okay too. Alright, so what we want to do is we are going to take some UV resin and just a tiny amount and put that around here. And then we're going to take this guy and put that on where the UV resin is, and then we're going to UV resin it so that at least gets us a start. All right, I have all my stuff ready. I'm gonna take, there's a layer on these usually. It's so hard to show on camera. I'm gonna pull this off. And that gets discarded. A little staticky and sticking to me. But that helps kind of keep this clean and less scratches. So I'm going to put this, just set this here so I have it. And this is just a little piece of cardboard. A little resin. Using the same resin again. UV resin by CC DIY. And we're going to take this and we're just going to paint it on ever so thinly. I always want to do so much more than what really it requires, but once you put the plastic down on it, it kind of mushes it everywhere. And it goes a lot further than what you planned anyway. Okay. I'm going to try to carefully put this down on there best we can. Try not to put my entire finger in the UV resin. I was not wearing my PPE so I could show you guys a little more easily, but I have stuck my finger in the resin more times. Alright. I'm going to take a dry one of these. Just tap it down everywhere. You'll be able to see where it's touching and where it's not. Alright, we want to just kind of go all the way around. Make absolutely sure that this is as close to the center of the heart, of the ledge of the heart that we can get to. And that looks pretty good to me. I'm going to move this guy before I put my finger in it again. And we're going to cure that. Put that on for about 60, probably much more than I need, but all right. And that is cured. So all that did, so we still have our hole here. There's no fluid in here. That just keeps this guy in place. And something else that I learned from this Amy Makes on her YouTube channel that I was not as aware of, and I'm so glad that I learned it. Many people you will see will take UV resin. Let me back out a little bit. We'll take UV resin and dome this with UV resin. Not the best idea for a couple reasons. First of all, UV resin scratches more easily than regular 2-part epoxy resin, and when I'm shaking this, some of my little glitter is coming out of the bottom. So it's not as scratch resistant, but also it's not as strong. So I'm going to mix up 2-part resin, and we are going to dome this with 2-part resin. I am going to use a fast set, a quick set, which will take just a couple of hours, and I'm also going to stop shaking this so my glitter stops coming out all over the place, but they're so fun. I just love shaking them. Okay, so I will mix up some resin and I'll be back. All right, so I have my 2-part resin, my fast set. I actually use cast resin, the Liquidy Split Ultra UV. This is what I use. It's a 2-part resin, and I have it all mixed up here. And I am just going to dome this like I would dome a regular keychain. Some people do a couple steps differently. Like some people might, before they dome this, they might put their fluid in and finish that part. I personally do not do that. I do not trust my UV resin to do a good enough job of holding my plastic sheet down. It should. It's the whole reason that we kind of did that step, so it was a quick, you kind of glue it down. However, when you start manipulating the shaker, trying to put the fluid in, and sometimes you kind of like squeeze it a little bit, things like that, it puts too much strain on the UV resin. And you might get like little mini, I don't know if cracks are the word, but places that it's no longer sealed completely. So I like to do this to add strength and stability early on. I need to stop dripping. Again, I typically do this with my PPE. It's just tough to do all that while I'm trying to show you guys. So, do as I say, not as I do. Alright, so I made sure I came to the very edge on all of this. And doming means that there's a bit of like a meniscus to it, which means that it almost wants to kind of flow over the edge, but it doesn't. I'm going to look at it from a couple different angles and just make sure that I'm not missing anywhere. Kind of hit the light off of it a certain way. That looks great. Alright, so I'm going to let this sit for it's evening right now. I'll probably let this sit overnight again, because resin does stay flimsy in this small of a, or this narrow of a coat for a while. So I want this to be nice and strong. So I will let this sit until tomorrow, and I will see you tomorrow. Hey everybody. All right. So while I have my my heart doming, I did forget to say that I took my torch and did just a quick torch over the top just to get any bubbles out of that top dome layer. So it's looking super nice and clear. So that is happening over there, and it is still curing, but I forgot to talk about just the little torch, because you definitely don't want bubbles in that top layer for sure, or you will see them forever. I'm going to talk about the liquid that I'm going to use. So the last time that I made this guy, like I mentioned before, it does move. It's just rather slow. So, and I used this that I found at Walmart. It wasn't super cheap, so again, I think I'd probably make my own after this. I was just having a really difficult time finding glycerin anywhere in my area. So this has glycerin and water in it. But this was kind of, as liquidy as this looks, when it was in my shaker like this, it just seems too thick. So, what I did is I took a little cup here and I put 10 cc's of this direct from the bottle, and then I just had distilled water and I put 5 cc's of that. So 10 of this, 5 of the water. I can't remember how much this shaker holds, to be honest. It's definitely not more than 15 cc's though, so there's 15 total in here. When I first put the water in, it kind of got almost really cloudy, like a oil and water mixing kind of almost, or kind of like when you mix resin when it's not mixed yet, it kind of has that kind of marbly weirdness to it. And I thought, oh, that wasn't a great idea. Maybe I do have to use this straight up. Maybe I can't add water. But I mixed it for a very short amount of time and it's clear, and I've let it sit out now for about an hour and it's still clear. So we're going to go with it. We're going to give it a try. I have a syringe here that I've since washed out. It used to be saline. I have an 18 gauge needle. I probably could make a smaller hole in my, I could get a smaller bit on this guy, and I probably will. This is all I had at the moment. So I'm going to fill this syringe up. This holds, it measures up to 10. It holds about 12 cc's. So we will get this set for when our shaker dome is hardened and cured, and we'll get ready to put the fluid in. All right, and something that I learned, so as you can see, I do have an air bubble right there. I have like a little one right here. That's about it. And a lot of people sit and they tap this and tap it, and I mean, that sometimes does work. You can flick it, sometimes it works. But what I've actually learned being a nurse is if you make one much bigger air bubble, they like to stick together and then it's easier to expel the whole thing. So kind of mobilize these. Air goes up, right? So if you're going to tap it, you want the syringe facing up. And as you can see, the air bubbles did move kind of to the top, but how do we make sure that they don't get stuck in this little edge here and they actually go out the top? I'm going to remove my needle here for a minute and just show you the syringe by itself. So I'm going to pull back on here, which is going to make a big air bubble. See the big one? There's a big one, there's a small one. But now if we tap, that air bubble becomes one big air bubble. So by pulling back and making one big one, now I can hold it straight up, and very carefully, you want to do this very controlled. You want to just push your plunger up and get all that air out. Keep pushing until you have a little bead of fluid at the top. So again, we're going to suck back. Just going to do this all over again. So there's a big air bubble in there. Then I'm going to have it straight up and very slowly. I'm going to very controlled. I'm not going to do it like this. That gives you no control. We're going to do it one hand, and we're going to push with this hand. So straight up, we have that big air bubble in there. And then I'm going to push the plunger up, and you'll see it start expelling the air. You'll see that air bubble get smaller and smaller and smaller. And the fluid's coming up. And you can see right there, that's the last of the air bubble. See, I pull back, air bubble, I push out, a bead of fluid. So that means I have no more air bubbles in here. So I'll put my needle back on, and we are air bubble free. Hey everybody, welcome back. So this is cured. Also, I know we're on like day 3 and I have still not painted my awful fingernails, and I apologize, you have to keep looking at those. But it's summertime and I've been gardening a lot, and it's kind of just counterproductive, I think, to try to do them. Anyway, whatever. Just deal with it. So we have our top layer of 2-part resin on here. So if you look super close, you sometimes can see where a tiny little line where our plastic sheet was, like, oh, maybe right here a little bit, but it is so difficult to see. It just looks like the top is clear. So that's perfect. That's what we're going for. All right. So now's the time that we put in our liquid. So I had talked in the last clip about how I mixed this up. So we're going to see how that goes, and also how I got all of the air bubbles out of it. Another thing that I find extremely helpful when doing things like this is I have this clip. I don't really know what it's for. I think it's just a general clip that I got probably at Walmart or Target. We actually here use them for like chip clips, but it's nice that it has a flat surface here on both, and it doesn't, it's not super tight, so it's not going to hurt anything. But our hole is here, and I like having something to be able to just sit that up so it's not falling over. Once we fill this with our fluid, and we're kind of dinking around a little bit with getting some resin in there and filling that hole, I mean, inevitably it always falls over, and then it leaks, and then it's wet. And it's not just wet, like glycerin's a little almost oily. It is water soluble, I guess, but it's slippery, it's oily, right? So it's not as easy as just like dabbing up some water and it's dry. And you definitely don't want to put resin in here to try to seal this when it's wet. So herein lies our problem otherwise, but this is a perfect solution for that. So get one of these. They come in packs of, oh, I don't know, 10 for a couple bucks. So I'm going to inject this. I'm going to grab a paper towel here. So we got all of the air bubbles out of the syringe itself. But now I'm also going to do a little bit here and get all the air bubbles out of the needle. So I'm going to just very carefully, again with a lot of control, actually see a tiny air bubble since I've been letting this sit here overnight. So I'm just getting the last air bubble out. All right, so it's hard to show you because I want to hold this upright. So I'm going to hold it upright, but I'm going to take my paper towel here just to, because some air comes out, but also some of the liquid comes out. There, I think I got all the air bubbles out. So something that's worth noting, right now there's air in here, right? And where you put fluid in, air has to come out. It's kind of like when you pour a gallon of milk, it kind of does the thunk, 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 because air is trying to get in while the milk's trying to get out. So same thing with this. There will be air coming out of here while I'm injecting my fluid in. So the size of your hole kind of matters a bit, that you don't want it super tight with your needle. Again, this one's maybe a little bigger than I needed it, but air is going to come out. So I'm going to put this in, and again, if I weren't doing this on camera, I would have my syringe totally upright while I'm doing this. So if there are any air bubbles in here, they're going to come to the top. But I'm going to do this a little bit more on the side just so you can see it a little better. Try to zoom in. I am going to put some fluid in here, but not all the way. So you can see it kind of going in there. Go about halfway-ish. I'm going to pull this out. find my cover so I don't stab myself. And I'm actually going to take this off my little guy here for a minute. What I want is, so there are some air bubbles trapped kind of underneath all of my things. So I am going to kind of tap this around a little bit. See if there's an air bubble going up right now. And I want to get the air out of here as much as I can, so it's not trapped under all these things. So I'm going to shake it a bit. I'm going to try not to have stuff come out of here. You can hold your finger over here if you want to. It's kind of hard for me to shake it back and forth while I do that. So another air bubble kind of came to the top there. Some people like air bubbles in their shakers because, as you see with this huge air bubble, the stuff moves around a lot more freely when there's an air bubble. It kind of pushes it out of the way. So, you know, if you were wearing this, air bubbles would be making the stuff move. But most people don't want air bubbles of any kind. So I'm going to try to get all my stuff over to one side here, just so I can make sure that there's nothing under there. That looks pretty good. I'm going to try to, well, you can still see a couple little air bubbles here. And we're just going to try to work these out. And what that means is work them to the top. So when the air gets expelled out of here, those air bubbles go with it. So I'm actually fairly happy with that. Oop, there's a little air bubble stuck to my bone right there, if you can see it. It's right there, stuck to him. So I could tap this and shake it a little more. Shaking it too much and too vigorously can actually create smaller air bubbles, so you want to be cautious of those. So once I have most of them, I'm going to kind of tap this. And all right, we're gonna, some people let this sit overnight too to try to let even more air bubbles come to the top. I'm not as finicky about that. Again, a little bit of air in here actually helps move things around, I think. Starting to put my little thing back on there. I do inject more slowly. And now I'm going to have to start setting this up a little bit because now I want the air to actually come out of the top and not the fluid. Let's see if I can move this here. And if you just saw, a whole bunch of fluid just came out and went down the edge because I was too busy trying to focus on my phone than what I was doing. So I'm going to take a minute and clean that up. Put this back up here. Just going to fill the top a little more. Until I really don't see an air bubble in there anymore. So there is an air bubble, you can see it to the very top. Hard to see. There we go. There's our air bubble right there. So I'm going to stand this up. I'm going to put my needle all the way down in the fluid, not just in the air bubble. If you try to fill the air bubble itself, if you try to put the tip of the needle into the air bubble, it actually makes fluid come out of the top more likely. Whereas if you put it down here, it kind of fills from the bottom up and it pushes that air bubble out. Slowly, sorry, I have to tip this again. All right. I think that's pretty close. Another thing to note, which I just did, if you squeeze this, squeeze this way, it does move a little bit. This is not extremely hard, so you can actually squeeze and almost, what do I want to say, almost like make a vacuum in it or push more fluid out. Let's see if I can show you here. So here's my air bubble. Try to get the light on there. I'm going to squeeze this. See how I can squeeze some stuff out of the top there? So be careful when you're filling it. If you are squeezing this pretty tightly and you fill it up and you think all the air bubbles are gone, when you release it, it's going to suck air back in there and you're going to be like, how did I get that huge air bubble? I just got all the air bubbles out. So something to keep in mind. Another thing, this guy, you can either do it on the edge maybe, or it really doesn't squeeze it that tight. So I'm going to fill it up here one last time since I got a little bit of the fluid out by showing you that. All right, there we go. So this is where I'm going to leave it in here. I'm not going to keep moving it around. Very carefully dry the inside of this hole that I drilled. I'm gonna spin my paper towel like that and kind of stick that there to try to absorb. Twist it like that. All right, so what I'm basically doing is drying out the inside there, so when I put my UV resin, which I'm grabbing right now, when I put that in there, it will be nice and dry. Alright, so I'm going to put just a little bit of resin. I'm actually going to start by, I'm going to take, you can either take a little pin or a toothpick. I'm going to do this in 2 steps. So I put a little bit in there first. All right, I time-lapsed that for 60 seconds. What I also did, which I always forget to do, is I leave this out there and then that gets cured too from under my light. So I waste a little bit, but all right, so that was the first one. I'm gonna put a little more on here and try to remember not to cure it. And now I'm gonna take my toothpick. If you put too much in, as long as you have a really thin or a fine sanding tool, like a file or something like that, you can sand off the extra. move this out of the way. Cure that again for another, probably 30 seconds is fine, but I'm going to do a minute. All right, that's almost been a minute. And that feels nice and smooth, so I did not put too much. I don't have anything to sand. And I can squeeze it, and we are not leaking any air, so that's great. I'm gonna see if there's any more I could put on here. No, that's pretty good. So this one moves a whole lot more than my other one. I would almost say, though, I would almost add a little more water. I like mine to move a lot, but maybe not. I mean, you know, if you move around, you don't want it to settle at the bottom within like 2 seconds and not be able to see that it actually moves. So then what I do is, you can see there's this hole here. I usually find a Sharpie marker, if I have one, that matches, and I will just color a little bit over that. Or what you could do, they make acrylic like markers for resin, basically, kind of paint markers, and you could paint the whole edge a specific color. So it could be you know, like a darker pink, or a pink that maybe doesn't match perfectly. You could do a gold or a silver and kind of make it look finished on the outside. So that part is totally up to you. And oh, we need to take this into a dark room and see how well my glitter glows in the dark. So let's go do that. All right, here we are on my bathroom counter. And I'm gonna turn the lights off. Everywhere else in my house I have windows, so I don't have too many total dark places during the day. So, all right, I'm gonna shut the light off. Wow, that's pretty cool. Well, I think it's official. From now on, I will be putting this glitter from Mr. Fancy Pants in all of my shakers because it's pretty great. So, all right, there we have it. There's our shaker. You can do whatever you want to it. You can glue something on the back to make it a keychain. I wouldn't drill into this, but you can glue something on the back to have it on the keychain. They do make shakers that actually have little keychain holes that are in the mold, so those are actually quite useful. Otherwise, like I said, typically I make badge buddies, so I glue on the badge part, and then somebody wears this while they work.